Good morning. Well, thank you for coming along at quick notice. As you've seen, the US has announced a new tariff regime, and New Zealand exporters will face from this weekend 10% on all of our goods exports. There's no indication of any change to services exports. Whilst this is not unexpected, it is something that will have an impact upon New Zealand exporters, but it is important to note that there are many other countries around the world that are facing much higher tariff rates than New Zealand exporters will be. We've had a chance during the course of the morning over the last few days to talk to a number of the companies who export a lot to America. They are telling me they still see opportunity in that market for them. We are taking a bit of time to try and get more detail around exactly what the announcement means and how it will be implemented, but it's very clear that the US, although they're putting a tariff rate in place, has viewed New Zealand and our trading relationship as well balanced. Tariffs in themselves are not good for trade. This is likely to have an impact upon not only international trade but also upon inflation, demand, and at the same time some currency rates. But we'll be working very closely with our exporters during the course of today and some of our exports to get as much information as we can so that we can be well prepared in that market. With that in mind, happy to take questions. So that's one of the things we're clarifying very quickly. It appears that it is a blanket 10%, but we are seeking more information on that quickly.
The Australian Prime Minister has described these tariffs as not the act of a friend. Do you agree with this?
Well, we still have a very constructive and positive relationship with the US. It is not surprising, as we said yesterday, New Zealand is likely to be captured in one way or another by tariff rates. I expect that we'll hear a number of things from various countries of the world. The important thing to focus on, though, is actually whether or not New Zealand exporters will be competitive in the US market. Whether or not US exporters will be competitive in the US market. We are no worse off than anybody else. In some cases, other countries will find higher tariff rates. We're working with their exporters to have a better understanding of that.
Just on that, is there almost a sense of relief from within in the fact yourself that it's only 10% and not higher?
No, it's not a relief because tariff rates in themselves push up prices and they're not good for trade. So we're not feeling relieved, although I think there is recognition that actually New Zealand is not seen as one of the countries that has an unbalanced trading relationship with the US. We're going to take a little bit of time to work through exactly the detail of that because although we have information coming to us from Washington, much of it is based upon the speech.
Back to Sam's question, is this the way you treat a friend? The fact that we don't even have the full information, is that how you treat a partner?
Well, ultimately, the US has been very clear that they're putting tariffs in place. And I think that has been well signalled through the election campaign and since then. Ultimately, they have a right to make decisions about, their export regime, as New Zealand does as well. Our trade is very complementary. US exporters into New Zealand face about 1.9% tariff rate on average. New Zealand is a little bit higher than that going in the other direction. So although tariffs are not good for trade, exporters are telling me that actually there is still opportunity for them in the US market, even with this announcement.
In the chart that Donald Trump held up, it calculated, it came up with some sort of number for each country about how much the tariff rate was for US goods coming in. It said it was 20% in New Zealand. Do you have any idea where that number
So we're working through it at the moment. There's an assumption that that's a WTO most favoured nation MFN tariff rate that will be applied. New Zealand actually applies a much lower tariff rate across the board to our exports into the US. For US exports into New Zealand. I've asked our officials to go and clarify that with the US so that actually the right information is being used, but we don't have a 20% tariff rate.
No, is there a sense that maybe GST is included in some of that?
Well, that's one of the things that we will talk to them directly about, although if our average tariff rate of US goods into New Zealand is 1.9%, it would be lower than they have on that chart. We're going to clarify that. Irrespective of that, we have a very low tariff regime in New Zealand, and the tariffs that are applied do fall below the 10% that is now being applied to, as a minimum to exports from countries around the world, but we'll be clarifying that with US. No, I don't think it's worrying. Ultimately, no other country in the world that we can see has a lower rate than 10%. So the US has classified us in the area of countries that they work with. They've made a decision that they want a higher tariff regime for a range of reasons. Well, they're imposing a 10% tariff rate on every country of the world. In some other countries, the European Union through Southeast Asia to parts of South America, they're 30 or 40% much higher. So ultimately, we'll clarify that with them, but every country of the world is facing 10%.
They're broadcasting that we're charging them 20% when you can't even explain that. How is that?
I wouldn't suggest they're broadcasting it. But I wouldn't accept your framing as they're broadcasting it. I've asked officials to go and clarify that for me.
They're making up numbers, aren't they?
Well, we won't be looking to retaliate because that would put up prices on New Zealand consumers and it would, be inflationary. We're going to take a little bit of time today to get as much information as we can. We're talking closely with exporters. Cabinet will have an opportunity to consider that information on Monday.
Damien O'Connor has suggested there might be benefit of getting together a sort of a coalition, so to speak, of like-minded trading partners and going to the US as a group. Have you had any conversations with our like-minded nations on that?
So I've been having a lot of conversations over the last couple of weeks with trade ministers from a range of countries in the world, from when we were in India through the UAE to the European Union to the UK, Canada and so on. That's something that actually we could consider, but I've had an opportunity to talk with Damien O'Connor this morning and briefed him. I've offered him an opportunity to meet with my officials. I think it's very important, and I've suggested to him he and I should work closely together on this. It's in New Zealand's best interest that actually we are lockstep.
Some of New Zealand
These tariffs will impact inflation. Have you got any kind of forecasting on that 10% number to see how it would impact inflation?
So they wouldn't impact New Zealand inflation. I'm meaning that if we were to reciprocate, it would put prices up upon New Zealanders based on imports sort of being more expensive. No, I haven't looked at inflation in the US, so that would be for them to do. But what we do know is we have about $9 billion worth of exports. So the cost of this would be around $900 million to New Zealand exports going to that market. I think that there is some pretty clear evidence that will be worn by US consumers, not New Zealand exporters.
Some of New Zealand's key trading partners in Asia and elsewhere are facing even higher tariffs than 10%. What could that mean for New Zealand in terms of economic interaction and flow on impacts for New Zealand exports?
Well, I think, as I said earlier, tariff rates and trade wars in themselves is not good for the world's economy, and it's not good for trade. There is going to be some impact, and that will flow through to New Zealand. But there are also going to be substitution and opportunities. I mentioned earlier there are parts of the world now who have already said they're putting tariffs upon US goods. In those countries, their consumers will still want the beef or the other things that has been consumed. There will be opportunities for New Zealand exporters to look at that. We have a very broad trade profile. We have trade agreements with many parts of the world, and successive governments have ensured that New Zealand exporters have opportunities, and many of our exporters have taken advantage of that. However, tariff rates are not good for New Zealand trade. There will be a cost to New Zealand exporters, but they do tell me they still see opportunity in the US market.
You talked about
Well, we're not going to apply a reciprocal tariff rates at 10%, so no, that wouldn't change. The tariff rate is on New Zealand goods going into the US market, and so anything we import, the cost won't change directly as a result of tariffs for New Zealand importers or those that may manufacture further.
The price outside of the US, if the prices go into the US, is there a flow-on impact that affects?
Only in the case that a good going into the US faces a tariff rate, it's being reprocessed and then exported. The answer would be yes, there is cost added to that, but many of the pharmaceuticals we get come from a range of places around the world, from India to the European Union. There would be no direct impact upon those.
you talked about.
We went to Washington DC to get the best possible result for New Zealand. The purpose of our mission has been achieved. Do you agree with that? How is the best possible
Well, yes, it is, because the best possible result is we are no worse off than any other country in the world. Every country in the world faces a minimum of 10%, some as high as 30 or 40%, and a worse outcome for New Zealand would be that we had higher tariff rates than some of the countries we compete against. We haven't. So I want to be very clear, tariff rates in themselves are not good things, but New Zealand exporters in the US market still have a level playing field against every other exporter in the world, and in some cases the tariff rates they face will be lower than others, albeit 10% will add cost to their exports and will flow through to a higher cost for US consumers.
If it's,
Pardon me? Oh, well, I mean, there was some indication of what it might look like for New Zealand, but I took the position of waiting until today's speech to be sure.
you talked about the $900 cost, but if it's a blanket 10% absorbing current tariffs that New Zealand has already paid, presumably the cost will be
So we're waiting to see exactly whether it is blanket 10% or 10% on top of others, and I'll be able to give more information once we know.
Tariffs at the moment for US?
Well, our average tariff rate is around 2%. So you'd work it through. I have that. I'll provide it to you.
Products that are higher than 10% at the moment that can
Not, I don't. I think it's a 10% minimum. I don't expect things will be falling, but there are very few, if any, that I can see. For instance, cars have been high for a period of time, but we don't export motor vehicles.
We have stacking.
Pardon me?
Other tariffs are stacking, like those on China. Do you really think that ours won't be stacking?
We're seeking information, so as soon as I have it, I'll make it available to you.
Have you seen Trump back down on imposing tariffs in the past as part of a negotiating tactic? Do you think that there's any kind of potential convincing that can be done here from the New Zealand perspective to ensure that he backs down on that?
Well, we've made the case of how low our tariff regime is and how complementary. We will be going to clarify the difference in their view of what our applied tariff rate might be. If it is around the WTO MFN arrangement, as I said, it is much lower. That will clarify that. But I think we need to take a little bit of time over the next day or so to get as much information as we can. Ultimately, people are reacting to a speech. I think there was a lot of detail and information on that, but before we can be sure for our exporters, we want to get a lot more information.
Do you foresee this having any impact on the government's ability to hit its target of doubling export volumes?
Well, I think if we look at our exports around the world, they have grown significantly. There have always been challenges for New Zealand exporters and for the world's economy and New Zealand's economy, but we remain focused on the ambitious target of doubling exports by value over 10 years. We have seen exports grow quite considerably in the US to be our second largest goods market over a period of time, passing Australia, but actually the world remains a very competitive place, and so there will still be, it's still an ambition. It's not one we're going to reassess.
Certainly no worse off than any other country. One country that wasn't on that list is Russia. They don't yet have tariffs applied to their
I think in everything I can imagine, we're not worse off than Russia.
Minister, Australia was name-checked for its ban on imports of...
Say that again, sorry?
Australia was name-checked by Donald Trump this morning for its ban on importing US beef. That's due to biosecurity risks. Does New Zealand have any similar restrictions on the import of US beef because of foot and mouth?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Is there any possibility, I don't think it's been specifically raised yet, would you change the volume limit on imports of US raw pork? It's less than 3 kilograms.
So I've asked my officials, so the Minister of Biosecurity and I have asked officials to go and look at those settings. We are asking them to look at them now some years later since they were put in place. They will have learnt a lot from it. We're asking them to ensure that the New Zealand border remains secure, not to weaken biosecurity, but to see if there are ways that the product is able to come to New Zealand with the same or a higher level of biosecurity. We'll await for that information. But the answer is during the last few years, we've seen the amount of US pork exported to New Zealand increase significantly. New Zealand is 60% of the pork we consume comes from the US. In fact, it's shown that those biosecurity measures are not a barrier to trade because it's gone up so significantly. I'll get the information for Minister of Biosecurity to provide more information to you, but it is around an assessment of risk at that level. It's not likely to pose a risk to New Zealand entering inadvertently into the feed chain.
Australia has announced a package of $50 million for affected sectors. Would New Zealand be looking to consider doing the same?
So we're going to take a little bit of time today to talk to the different sectors to better understand it and to get as much information as we can. Cabinet will have the opportunity to consider that on Monday, but I don't expect we'll be in a place where we will need to provide any support to New Zealand businesses. I think tariff rates anywhere upon New Zealand exporters is not a good thing. We have a very low tariff regime. We're very competitive in what we do, and actually we support a rules-based trading system. So tariffs in themselves are not good. But New Zealand exporters are very nimble and they are very able and very competitive. They adjust very easily. Many of them from some time ago have been thinking about the US market and considering risk of themselves. Some tell me they have started to look at other markets rather than the US. Those are choices for them. We just want to make sure that our relationship with the US is well understood. We are a very low tariff regime. We respect the rules. We don't manipulate currencies or put biosecurity measures in place as protection against New Zealand exporters. And that case has been made to the US and will continue to be. Well, I had an opportunity to talk very broadly about, trade issues around the world with the Indian Trade Minister. I've done that on a number of occasions, and most recently when we announced the launch of an FTA. I don't expect it will have any impact upon our negotiation. We both have committed to, launching a negotiation with a mind to getting it done. We've both ensured the resources are there to be able to negotiate, irrespective of what might happen with other countries around the world. Of course, India is negotiating an early harvest or high-level agreement with the US at the moment. They have the capacity to do more than one agreement at once, as we do.
Can I ask about China? And so putting a 34% tariff on China, that's on top of the 20% that's already there, so that's going up to 54%. I mean, China is our largest trading partner. Do you have concerns about the imposed tariffs that are going on to China?
Well, I think we're going to have to take a little bit of time for next week to see what this means and whether there is reciprocation of tariff rates from different countries of the world who are now facing a higher tariff regime going into the US. Ultimately, it is likely to have an impact upon demand and, it could be inflationary in parts of the world. That in itself has an impact on New Zealand because we're an export nation. We are exposed to the world. But we have agreements with countries of the world, from the European Union to the UK to the CPTPP to China to the UAE and the GCC, many of them. We have good trade access to be able to weather these storms as we have in the past. But I say again, trade wars and tariff rates are not good for the world's economy, and they're certainly not good for New Zealand exporters.
Just to be really clear, that 20% tariff allegation is wrong, isn't it?
Yeah, we're going back to clarify it, but our tariff rates are not 20% inwards, that's right.
With GST built in, what is it?
So US exporters, the average is about 1.9% they face into New Zealand. That would take it below 17%. So that's the reason that I'm not being obscure. I just want to go and get the information from them. We'll make the case in Washington to them today.
So they might just be
We'll see. Thank you.